Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson.
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line. And today we're super excited because we've got our best friend, Brandon Graham, back on the show.
Gentlemen,
How you doing, Brandon?
excellent.
So today we're going to be talking about one of Brandon's previous books from another publisher. Boo, boo, hiss, hiss.
But now Brandon is what? He's part of the Living the Line family? You're actually on the roster now.
Brandon's got a book coming out in October called Moonray that he has done with Shersho Penalta, Shersho G. Penalta, and that book has kind of given us the occasion to sort of talk about, Brandon, your earlier work and put Moonray in some kind of context for that. So you and Carson and I have all talked about Rain Like Hammers, your most recent image book before that. But today we're going to be talking about the misunderstood, the legendary, the semi-porny multiple warheads.
Is it
It's a weird one.
misunderstood?
No, I wanted something sensational to say
Okay.
at the
I'll go
top
with
here.
misunderstood.
Fair.
Is it misunderstood?
I don't know. I don't know how people are expect to take Warheads because it kind of, I feel like it's my most I should say before Warheads I was working mostly on, like, I did King City kind of during some of Warheads and right before it. And King City has a lot of riffing off of science fiction and detective stuff that already exists, where Warheads was like a bigger struggle for me because I felt like I was trying to create something more whole cloth than I'd ever done before. And so I think that it came out weirder because of that. And I was trying to do something I hadn't really seen that much in comics at all, which was to do a couple who'd been together for a long time in the middle of their relationship. And it wasn't like a story of young love, and it wasn't a story of like, you don't see like I can't think of many just like long-term relationships that exist in comics where
Yeah.
they're together and that's just how it is. So I was almost thinking it was like an Asterix and Obelix style thing of an actual couple.
Well, if I understand the chronology correctly, you had drawn the sort of seed of Warheads, the very first sort of semi-porn comic before King City, and then you essentially drew the King City Vol.1 that was published through Tokyo Pop,
Right.
and then did Warheads in between the image completion of King City. Is that correct, or am I mangling
Yeah,
things?
yeah. I'm a little more convoluted than that in that I did the first. So I did the first. I'll say actual porn because it was done in for Sizzle magazine back in the old NBM days when I was doing Pillow Fight and Purpose of the Unknown over there.
Right.
But so yeah, then I did King City Volume 1 at Tokyo Pop, and then did trying to remember the chronology. I did a issue 1 of Multiple Warheads actually at Oni Press,
Okay.
and then the King City deal kind of brought me over to Image, and then at Image I continued both King City and Multiple Warheads. So it's
Okay.
And
like a series that
those of you who have only read the Tokyo Pop edition of King City, just those first 180, 160 pages or whatever it is, are go run, not walk, to your local comic store to pick up the full image edition of the book.
yeah, I wonder at this point I imagine there's probably a lot less copies printed of the Tokyo Pop edition.
Right? Yeah, that's a good question. Because they were really hammering that first volume. You were part of that first wave of. I mean, what was their tagline? Amerimanga?
Amera
Was that
manga, yeah. It was me and who else? Becky Cloonan did a
Mhm.
book there at the same time. Sophie Campbell and
I know
uh,
Tori really
M
liked Bizengoth, whoever
yeah,
did
M
Bizengoth.
Alice Legros,
yeah, there's another guy. There's
Simon.
another guy who went into American mainstream comics. His name I'm spacing, but yeah, it was a bunch of people who had success outside of Tokyo Pop that did books there. I don't know if the Bizengeist artist did much outside of Tokyo Pop, but um, I was the one person that managed to just through sheer tenacity wrestle my Tokyo Pop book from
Right.
them.
Well, thank
Right.
goodness, because now we have a complete King City.
Yeah,
So yeah,
and
it certainly helped me out a lot.
So people who are not aware of the situation with that, so Tokyopop had essentially like an exploitive contract where they sort of back ended being able to control things by having a shared copyright and shared trademarks on all the books they put out.
Sure.
And so even though they had ceased publication in 2010, which should have reverted those rights back to the artists, they left open a division that was explicitly there to try to sell media rights to other entities. So even if a book was developed entirely by the artist, I mean, I'm assuming you never had any kind of editorial.
I actually did have editorial on King City, but
You did. Interesting.
yeah, and I went through several different editors. I had a really good editor near the kind of later chunk of it, which was good. Yeah, it was a weird process. Yeah, and Tokyo, but the frustrating thing about Tokyopop kind of maintaining the rights is there was a lot of books that were really solid, good books that just didn't continue, and the people who made them didn't have a choice to continue them at all. And it was really weird. I mean, I owe a huge thanks to Image for actually kind of pulling it out of Tokyopop, because it was really frustrating how much they didn't want money. Like, we were like, can we just publish this thing and send you guys money? And they're like, let's negotiate this very harshly for a year, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a brutal process. I mean, and it doesn't make any real sense until you kind of look at how. I mean, I look at the national campaign that they had for that that project that Stu Levy, the owner of Tokyopop, wrote under a pen name, and then had Courtney Love like look at their designs or whatever, and stuck her name on it. I mean, they must have spent, I mean, God knows how much. You know, they could have. I mean, it could have been tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on that advertising campaign.
Oh yeah, the book was called Princess Eye. That one actually had really good art.
Yeah, who was the artist in that? I don't recall, but
The Japanese artist who I've never seen anywhere else. But yeah, it was a really weird publisher. I went to their offices once in LA, which was a bizarre experience. I'd ended up for a month in LA. I did this really fun trip down there where I'd stayed at a different artist place every week for a month. And I stayed at a friend's house who was like working on the Family Guy cartoon, and then I stayed at a friend's house that was working on the Tom Goes to the Mayor cartoon, and then another friend of mine that was working on the Boondocks cartoon, and then I stayed at James Jean's house for a week, which was interesting. Got to see him. It was when he's doing Fables covers, and I got to see his process and how he was like purposely doing things so you couldn't tell what was digital and what was painted. So it was a really fun week, and during that week, I went into the Tokyopop office because I love the kind of Marvel bullpen idea, and I was like, oh, my publisher's here. I can go up there and just like work in the office rather than sitting in a coffee shop. The story I've told you guys before that I don't think I've said on video at all before was my only interaction with Stu in person was me sitting at a desk, like in a little cubicle working, and he'd come to his office and brought an intern with him because he didn't have the key, or there's some reason he didn't want to unlock the door, and he had an envelope that he was trying to get the intern to lift the door up, and he was trying to slip this like fat envelope underneath the door of his office, and it took him like 15 minutes of it just not happening. And every time I see a press release for Tokyopop, or every time I interact with them over email, I always just think of that moment of just like him doing this idiot, like, are you a noob to three-dimensional space that does not have doors work?
You could have just used your key.
Yeah. So, charming man.
I was trying to remember the name of the other guy who had a kind of breakout from that as a Felice something.
Felipe Smith did.
Yeah, there you go. Felipe Smith.
MBQ, I think, was his book. He did. He's a really talented guy, but he hasn't done. I think he did a very short run on a Ghost Rider comic, if I remember right.
Right, and he's published in Japan now. I believe he has a serial going, or at least he did last time I checked. Yeah, and I went to school with the people who did the Peach Fuzz comics.
Oh yeah.
As well, which were also part of that first wave. Yeah, so incredibly, they had a great lineup of people, but there was something about the sort of naked IP grab aspect of it that sort of, at least like as a reader, kind of soured things for me when I realized that was essentially how they were treating it. It was like a tech company.
Yeah,
you
it
know.
did feel really tech startup. Yeah, it was interesting. Their office was like one of the flashiest places I've visited. I remember they had a giant Tokyo Pop logo on a rug that was like right outside of the elevators.
John,
Um,
you have that, right? Like there's a giant living the line rug when you enter your house.
yeah. Um, so there's some other weird thing about the Tokyo Pop office. Oh, the microwave. I probably told the story of the microwave a million times. So they had two microwaves in the kitchen, and one was for people to use to heat up their food, and the other one was to melt the glue on the manga that they were translating. Because they realized when they got stuff from Japan, the files weren't any better than they could actually get themselves by taking a printed book and scanning it like page by page.
Oh wow. So that's how they're unbinding the book.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
unbinding the book by melting
in
the glue in a microwave.
in the microwave. That is the funniest thing I've ever heard.
That's a
Yeah,
good
so
tip. I didn't know you could do that.
all their books have really odd, trim, because they would pop stuff up on that, and eventually, some of the licensors got wise to it and were not happy about that, and
Sure.
but yeah, it's kind of still the Wild West in terms of file delivery and things like that, because they were competing with Studio Proteus at the time, who like agonizingly did every single aspect of it as precisely as they could, and had like a printer in Japan make uh, you know, proofs of the original negatives, like
Mhm.
the best way possible, oversized prints, process prints of the original negatives, and had the letterers work on an overlay so that they could produce every little
Oh, certainly. Yeah, Proteus is kind of the gold standard. And they really had a quality because Torrance Smith had such a incredible eye for picking great manga to bring over to.
right.
But like, yeah, I mean, Tokyo Pop just felt like it was kind of the manga gold rush where they're like, everything's selling, let's bring over everything. And I remember trying to get like I got a couple. There's an artist named Erika Shirazawa, if I'm pronouncing it right, and
Right.
I got really into her books for a while. She was doing these very kind of soap opera uh, comics made for young women, just about like you come home and your husband is cheating on you with his secretary. What do you do
Yeah,
next? And
she's fantastic. Yeah, I love her stuff.
yeah, totally. And so
Hmm.
those ones, like there was some great stuff in the mix of
Hmm.
what Tokyopop was doing, but there was so much just mediocrity that they were just throwing at the American market. So it kind of made sense that eventually they fell apart because I think one of the big book chains essentially went out of business.
Right. It was a
Oh,
was it a Books a
uh,
Million or uh,
Borders,
no? It was
Borders,
the yeah
Barnes and
that
Noble, something like that.
Books a Million used to be the key,
Oh,
for
okay.
all that stuff. But yeah, it is. Sorry, I don't want to harp on this too long, but it sort of is reflective of the general editorial like indifference to nuance that they took creators like you and Becky Cloonan, and if you can't sell a Becky Cloonan or a Brandon Graham book, like what's the issue? Like their debut publication, I got the first copy of Mix. The first issue of Mix. I got a subscription to this thing.
Oh, nice.
Because I was really into manga at the time, and it's like, oh hey, they're gonna put out this and that and that, and you get this first magazine in the mail. Here's Sailor Moon, and you're reading this, lovely shoujo thing with no backgrounds and lots of sparkly eyes and everything. And the very next thing you turn to is Parasite, and it's this giant parasite like plant thing eating somebody's head and then eating a dog. You know what I mean? And it's like right there.
That
Oh,
sounds like the perfect book to me, the perfect mix of things. Sounds
I think
great.
they just got a new subscriber. Yeah, it was weird. I mean, at the time, I was coming from doing porn comics, so it didn't really, nobody knew or care about my stuff. But yeah, not being able to they didn't really market the Becky book
Right.
very
Right.
much. If I remember, it's called the Pirates of something.
Well, and then if I remember correctly, they paid her advances and she drew an entire second book that they never published.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I mean, it's just like just total indifference. But anyway, big digression.
I'll wrap it back around. Because
Yeah.
Brandon, you said something that caught my interest a while back, and then that manga you described that you were into kind of ties it in for me, where you're talking about wanting to do someone who'd been in a relationship for a while, and you're talking
Mhm.
about like these women coming home. Was that something that you were seeing like, oh, this does exist in the Japanese market? Why don't we have it here?
I can't think of it existing. I mean, I'm sure it exists. Like in superhero comics, it probably exists. There's probably like you get the Fantastic Four is probably the best
Yeah,
example of that.
Jean Grey and Cyclops or something.
Yeah, yeah. Like there's definitely versions of it, but Yeah, I think a lot of it might have been the kind of scene that I was in, where it was like kind of indie American comics were just more about. I remember, it's funny now because this is, uh 10, 15 years ago or whatever. I was like frustrated how everything was so focused on youth
Yeah.
and kind of like young love and things like that. And I was like thinking that, like, I'm not a high school student anymore. I don't really care about that type of story as much as I want to see like what people do with their lives next.
Well, that's why I grabbed my interest so much, because actually right before we got onto here, I told you guys a story about the guy working at Warner Brothers that I heard. But
Right.
part of that story was saying that they're all the guy who was telling me this was saying it's all about diversity, but then they only bring in people who have went to like Yale or Harvard as writers, and they only want young people to be cool. And so they're not having that older perspective and stuff. And me and Tori, I was telling her that, and we were talking about it. It's like, yeah, like, what is that? Because wouldn't you want to hear from older people who have gone through, like a 25-year relationship and the struggles of that? And that I've been thinking about that for like the last hour before we got on here, that I have the same complaint that so many things I pick up today are like the struggling 25-year-old working in a coffee shop, like in their first major breakup. And so it's interesting to hear you say exactly that, because it's like, yes, that's like, why wouldn't we want more of that? And I keep going, like talking about the manga that I've been reading. Like, I just feel like Japan is more sophisticated and older in some way, and because they don't seem to have that like
Hmm.
barrier to just, it's only for youth, it has to be cool.
Yeah, there's more of it. There's so much more going on in manga because there's just so much more manga getting made.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
like, they seem to respect those older creators. They keep working, like they don't wash out as like, well, you're not cool anymore.
yeah, yeah. Did you guys see the recent Mark Miller thing that's making the rounds these days?
No, what is it?
He did an interview where he talked about how comics is in, I don't know if this is even slightly true, but he says comics is in a worse place than it's ever been before, and we need 20 of the biggest superstar names in comics to return to Marvel and do amazing runs.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was thinking that that's not the problem, you know.
No, it's I mean, I have watched a few of his interviews, and he's very savvy about like the pop culture business side of comics, but I don't ever hear him say anything that seems like he's in it for the art form of it. Like his taste in stories, it's his natural taste, but it's kick-ass and it's shit that makes good movies. And he's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
doing that falsely, but
I mean, I thought I had earlier when you were talking about kind of wanting the kind of stories that I was talking about wanting, and not just wanting like a 20-year-old's first breakup story, is I think a lot of the stuff that sells really well is based in nostalgia, and like young love is like more powerful and more, it resonates more because you don't know what you're dealing with. And so I wonder if it's just people like us that spend all of our days reading comics and thinking about stories all the time that want more, and the average person's just like, yeah, first breakup, that sounds like an exciting thing, and we're like, we've read a bunch of those because we're delving into this stuff more than people that are just like on their lunch break.
do you
Right.
think Miller was suggesting that if we bring back some of the older top creators, that they would do more mature storytelling? Because I
No,
get the
not more
sense,
mature. Just he was doing it just on a pure sales level. Um,
yeah.
I think there's a larger, I don't know if this is getting off topic too much, but I think there's a larger problem of how I don't think the big publishers are really building up star talent anymore.
Right.
And they're doing it
Yeah.
slightly. Like Image has been doing a little bit with Zoe Thorogood, which is good to see, if I'm pronouncing
Mm-hmm.
her name right. Because I'm especially excited to see because she's a writer artist.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for the most part, it's interesting. I like them backing her really hard is really fascinating because I don't see her as somebody who's going to make like a big umbrella hit for Image. Like I could
Yeah.
see her doing like a Blankets, but I couldn't see her doing a Saga.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, like, if we move to more of that, so that's where I jump off board with Miller, is like, I don't know that we need X-Men to be good again. I think we need to just all quit caring about X-Men, because there's obviously this whole channel every day I'm posting something and it's great and it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah. I think the major thing for him is just keeping comic stores afloat. But I think that we're at a point now where the medium of comics is doing so much more than just like having kind of your monthly X-Men and everything.
Yeah.
And the difficulty there is that like the movie, you have to do something the movies can't do in comic books. And when it comes to superheroes, they're just they're not kind of keeping up with like all the advances in superhero storytelling are happening in film and television, and the comic books just really feel like the crackerjack version of it.
Yeah, they're treading water until the next underwear sale. I mean,
exactly.
Maintaining the product for the movie.
Well, let's take a look at someone who is doing popular work, working on a licensed property as Moonray is, but also investing like real personality and personal experience into the work.
Let's take a look at it. So you'll notice featured on the cover of multiple Warheads here is our today's sponsor. Living the Line is sponsored by hammocks. Live in a hammock. Don't get acid reflux anymore. Have your voice come back like me.
So I'm worried that this hammock lifestyle is eventually going to lead to you stealing pies off of windowsills.
Yoink. I will gladly take a hammock today and pay you tomorrow.
Living the Line is published out of the back of a mobile van.
Look, if you can live the hammock lifestyle and stay married, you're really winning. So will you tell us who these characters are on the cover here, Brandon, and where you first met them?
Oh, certainly. So this is Nikolai and Sexica, the kind of pseudo-Russian organ smuggler and werewolf main characters. So initially these characters were done in. I was living in New York City, and I was going into NBM, mostly French translation comic that did porn. They kind of only let me do porn comics because they did high-end European stuff as well, but then they subsidized it by doing porn comics.
Right.
And that was kind of what I was living off of at the time. I was working at a bar part-time and also doing porn comics. And I do the first story in this right after 9/11, and it was my post 9/11 dealing with all of the security checkpoints. New York story. And I actually, it was very topical at the time, and it was a trick. There's an airplane crashing into the World Trade Center panel in this that nobody got mad about until about 5 years ago. Someone tried to get mad about it and didn't get any traction on the internet. Because I remember drawing the comic and being like, they're not going to publish this panel. They're going to ask me to change it. And I think I had a plan for how to fix it. And they wanted me to change it, and they never did. And it's run through multiple printings at several different publishers now.
I'm trying to find
myself in the foot by mentioning it,
but I also don't want to, because I have to be a little careful.
Yeah, we actually can't show this first story here on YouTube, or YouTube might give us a demerit and a strike. But so it's safe to say that Sexica brings a werewolf penis back to the house. She smuggles it through security in various ways that you can imagine, body cavity concealment, and brings it back to her boyfriend, the mechanic, who places it upon his body with a crude surgery.
Yeah, they sew a second penis onto the werewolf boyfriend, or onto her boyfriend, and then turns him into a werewolf. Right. And then for the rest of the story, he's just a werewolf with two penises.
He's werewolf Dick Nick, right?
Yeah, you might be able to cover up around the panel, but maybe we don't need to show it.
I'm trying to flip through and find it. What page is it on? I guess
it's near the back of the book in the black and white section.
Oh, I never saw that before. Oh my goodness.
Oh, so okay. There we go. I see. It's in the. All right, I can cover up all the rest of it. It's in the word balloon.
Yeah, that's her. Oh man, that's wild. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was done in a very verboten time. Like doing a 9/11 joke now is tasteless, but back then it was It was the height of tasteless.
Especially as it's representing someone getting a butt
Insertion of
plug.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was in a much more trying to get away with things era than I am now.
Yeah, age
It's
and
interesting
wisdom,
how
right?
age changes some of that.
Yeah. So those are our two main characters, and then we pretty much immediately start to get, can you explain some of the world here? Because you immediately jump into this scale, this sense of scale that seems to be running through all of your work, really. So can you tell us more about the story and that idea of scale?
Yeah, so this is in a weird fictional version of our world, because a lot of the comics I do, like trying to think of it, like Rain Like Hammers is so far future, or Moonray or Prophet or any of those things are so far future that we don't really engage with stuff. But this is basically like a modern day comic just set in an alternate Earth. And one of the major things, it's kind of set around Russia, China, but there's no America. America was never colonized in this one.
Right.
And I got really interested in kind of reading up on I started reading on Russian history, and I didn't kind of I had this very 1980s kind of Cold War idea of Russia, and so I started to dig into that, and then I realized that modern Russia was not the red heat lie I was sold, and so I started digging much more into Chinese history. And so that's why we've got a giant Chairman Mao.
Right.
I had very rose-colored glasses about Mao back then. I remember I used to have a picture over my desk that was on one side it was old Mao, on the other side it was young Mao, and I would flip it depending on my mood. And I remember at one point a friend of mine, or one of my housemates, brought over a woman who had lived in China, and she was like, "Why have you got a Mao Zedong picture? You know, it's like just having a Charles Manson picture above your desk."
Yeah, it's interesting how casual some of that is in the Pacific Northwest, you know, and you get this kind of like, I remember when I was a kid, I would talk like Beavis and Butthead because I thought it was funny, and then eventually you just talk like Beavis and Butthead. And it's the same kind of thing. You live in Fremont, outside of Seattle, and you know, you think it's funny that the city of Fremont bought and imported a giant statue of Lenin.
Yeah.
And then after a while, it's like, you just have a giant statue of Lenin that you like, you know,
it's
like
very much like that. Yeah, I was trying to explain that to my girlfriend the other day. She was like, "Why is there a Lenin statue in Seattle?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's weirder now that I think about it, but
very unsettling."
yeah, like, would they do that? Would they put a Stalin statue up there? But
I've seen some students, not any of mine, but I've seen some younger artists making like positive Stalin imagery, which is unsettling to me.
Yeah. I mean, if you're into mass murder, he's your guy.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that there's an aesthetic return of the mustache, so that might be part of it. Is just his whole look is very in vogue right now. He's of the moment, you know.
Yeah.
There is a series of manga about Stalin. Like, I think it was like him sneaking out of his window so he could go out and have an adventure. It was very weird stuff.
So, Brandon, one more question on this page is immediately we get two other things that I very much associate with your work. Is on the statue of Mao, there's graffiti, which is one thing I see a lot in your early work, is that graffiti hip hop culture influence. And that coincides with the second one, which is wordplay and puns, where it's saying Mao and later instead of now and later. Can you speak to that kind of, I think it goes away a little bit in your later work, but the influences on that early on for you would be really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing graffiti. I got into kind of the Seattle graffiti scene in my late teens, and was doing it for a while. And I really got excited by the idea of essentially tagging things and making it, having to make work that, or draw a picture that relates to, like, I like the idea of like writing on a sign and responding to what the sign said. And so in my own comics, I started like doing that. So a lot of times when making these things, I would have like magazines I was flipping through, and I would have an ad in it, and I would do like a joke version of the ad and then do graffiti on it in the comic. And it was kind of me trying to recreate that feeling of that stuff. Another thing about this scene I should mention is everything's covered in missiles, because the idea of this city that she goes into is that it's there's a war that was constantly bombarded with missiles. So there's just the idea that there's kind of missiles stuck in everything outside of the city, and then there's like a dome that protects it. That was a fun thing to draw.
And the visual of her climbing the missiles is really impactful. Like there's a real sense of dis-ease there, because it's like, how many of those are duds, or they just haven't been set off yet. Exactly.
Yeah. I should mention her hat that she wears was a my one of my friends, Filthy Rich, that I've probably talked about. I made him a character in King City. He's the bartender in King City, but Filthy Rich designed the little skull. He would sell these things called skull caps when we lived together. It had the hat, and I drew it so much in the comic that it became kind of Sexka's symbol, but I always try to remember to credit him because I was just stealing his design to put it in there.
You know, the best argument I've ever heard for graffiti is that basically advertisement itself is a kind of mind control and pollution that takes over your visual space, and that essentially graffiti is a way to combat the legitimized, purchased, capitalistic advertisement with your own co-opted personal advertisement.
Yeah, it is a bit that. I probably have different feelings about it now in my 40s that I did in my 20s, but
right.
I mean, generally, also I think that it's one of those things that has just changed a lot in the last 20 years. But yeah, I do think that being able to vandalize advertising is a nice God-given right.
Right.
Well, and I think we're all in our early 40s ish. We're in our 40s,
Yeah.
and so we grew up very much at the tail end of Gen X, which was very much like the culture. What did they culture jamming? Like culture jamming was a real big thing, and that seems to be related to all that as well. And that definitely died in the mid-aughts as like a strategy. And I just don't think there's that sense of subvert. I think you get Fight Club as like the last big statement of that, and then it kind of dies off. But I think that's built into all of, at least most guys our age kind of have that culture jamming, at least the artistic ones.
Yeah, certainly. It is kind of a shame that I think something that's kind of modern stuff is lost is kind of the disdain of corporatism.
Right.
And that's really disappointing, because you see people that are very much like are very fight the system, but then they're really into giant corporations. It's like they're just very alien to me still.
They're happy to use their bodies as a billboard for you know, whatever, you know, brand they want, or advertise.
And happy to complain through their iPhone technology or whatever.
Yeah, this is the most old man conversation we ever had, but yeah.
Yeah. So okay, here's the question I got for you. So this second this is essentially the second story that you drew with these characters. This is in a non-porn comic, and is this also published by NBM?
No, this one was published by Oni Press.
Okay, Oni.
At that time, I was living in this big house that we called Yosh with Corey Lewis and James Stocco and Marley Zarcone and a bunch of other cartoonists. And Corey was doing his Shark Knife book over at Oni.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And so I had a copy of Shark Knife right here. Here it is. Shark Knife from Oni Press. It's an excellent
That looks great.
That's great.
I think that's volume 1. He did 2 volumes of this. But yeah, so he was doing Shark Knife there, and so I brought this story over to Oni, and this was one of the comics. At the time, I was working much slower. That page on the left, by the way, that's a real place in Seattle. I just drew a building on First Avenue.
Ah.
I need to do it more. Now I'm in the desert, so it's not quite the same environment, but I used to just go to real locations and just draw the pages from the location. And I think that was always a fun way to work.
Did that contribute to your sense of like map? Because that's always been a big part of, especially your early works, is you'll follow characters around like 3 people and you'll point out where they're on the map. Is that part of because you were always out and about doing this stuff that you developed?
Maybe,
that?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that was probably just I was really keen on the idea of anything that was visual storytelling I wanted to adapt into a comic, because I feel like I still very much feel like comics is kind of an untapped medium in a lot of ways, because it's like you can utilize everything every picture that's used, to every infographic you can use, and I think maps is a clear way that everyone engages. By the way, there's the royal boiler on the bottom of the page.
I wanted to ask about that. What, because that's like your Instagram name. You use that. What is this a concept there's more of it going on in your head?
Yeah, so that initially came from a comic I did called Universe So Big, that I did when I was 19, and it was about this mechanic brother and sister whose last name were Royal. They were Mari and Jackson Royal, and the Royal Boiler was the robot brain that they created. And so the idea that I barely touch on it in that many, like it's in this more than anything else, but it's basically the idea of whenever there's a robot brain showing up, it's a Royal Boiler.
Okay. It seemed like there was some deep history with this that I needed to know more about. So thank you for filling that in. And
Yeah,
then we get introduced to Werewolf Dick Nick here.
Yeah.
Who also smells like a werewolf and hears like a wolf too.
He's been influenced by his attachment. A theme that'll come back if in Rainlake Hammers, I think it's safe to say.
Oh, certainly.
And in Prophet, I suppose, as well.
Oh, yeah.
Not the werewolf Dick in particular, but the sort of implications of the body manipulation as a mental change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I like to write about a lot, about how much, because I think a lot about how much chemistry really affects not just your mood but your personality.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
like where's that coming from as an ongoing interest? Like here you even have these new eyes that they could put in that would change how you perceive things, which would obviously change your personality.
I mean, I think it's just a weird thing to be a person, right? And just being really aware of, like, if you're taking like antidepressants, or if you're like exercising and doing like really minor stuff, really can like change you as a person.
Yeah,
it makes me really aware of how, like, how what slaves to our meat suits we all are.
I engaged with that really explicitly during grad school. I was trying to make a documentary about me learning to do martial arts because it's like the most opposite thing of my natural person that I could think of. And I never made the documentary because the school shut me down as a project, and I just wound up going and doing it for fun. And it absolutely 100% changed me as a person just to put myself in a new situation like that. Yeah.
That's really cool. I was happy with that panel on the top left of the reflection in the glasses. I think one of my friends recommended that I do that. It's like, it's very different now because I'm in Las Vegas and I don't really have the kind of artistic community that I had, but it makes me kind of long for it, because when I look at this, I'm aware of how much I was around friends all the time that were like, do this and throwing ideas back and forth.
That seems to be like a core for you. Like, so it's not for a lot of artists. Like, you really seem to crave that social interaction and talk about it a lot and stuff.
Yeah, I also get that from engaging with work too. I think that's another thing too, is I think kind of maybe always, but certainly more lately, I've been really, especially when I went through my kind of Hergé Tintin thing, as it made me really aware of how much I wanted to, like, kind of have these conversations with work that I was engaging with, and not just other artists.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the Hergé Tintin, because that's basically the question I want to ask you is, how do we get from this black and white Oni issue, and obviously like the first half of King City, it must have, I see you as such a strong colorist, and that being such a fundamental part of your style and the way that your comics function, that it's almost hard for me to I can't imagine what it was like to sort of hold back that aspect of your comic making prior to that. Like, were you making color work in private and it just wasn't published? I mean, were you thinking color all the time? I mean, because you basically, it seems like you hit your stride almost immediately.
I mean, it certainly wasn't a holding back. I never planned on doing color comics initially. Initially, what I would do to do color covers as well is I would draw an image in black and white, and then I would photocopy it onto blue and brown paper, and then cut the paper with an X-Acto knife to combine things. I wonder if I have any examples.
Wow.
I don't think I do, but yeah. So I would do that, and then I didn't really own a computer for uh, a lot of my early art career, and then at a certain point, like around this time, I think I'd gotten my first computer, and it was basically like I learned Photoshop. I've probably told the story a million times. I learned Photoshop from Tomer Hanuka on my lunch breaks. I was working at the Strand in New York, and I would go, it's a bookstore in New York, and I would go
Yeah.
to Tomer's house on my lunch breaks, and he would quickly kind of run me through Photoshop, and I kind of stuck with that. And so, like, I remember like this multiple warheads story that you're looking at now was the first. I think it was my first like full color digital comic I ever did, and so I was really into the idea of trying to utilize color as much as possible. And like on this page, it might be at the bottom that you're not, that's getting cut off a little bit.
Yeah, it will show up on the camera.
Okay,
You
yeah.
have like a
But
red radiation, blue haunted, white living water, black magic. That's what you're talking about.
yeah, exactly. That was me trying to be like, well, I haven't worked in color before. What can I do with color? And I was like, oh, I can color code things. So that's sort of that. But yeah, it wasn't a big shift for me. And I always, it was almost like an identity shift in some ways. Where I was like, I always thought of just like I would be an independent comic artist that always worked in black and white because I grew up in 80s and 90s black and white comics mostly. I just assumed that I would be doing that always. And so when I realized like I can do work in color, it like opened up things really nicely. And yeah, it wasn't like a difficult shift, but it was really fun shift.
I mean, because you come out like this first spread, you come out the gate like this fully formed, sophisticated colorist who's you've kind of already got that thing you do where you lean towards the more neutral colors, but because you stay almost in the grays, everything still seems really vibrant. Like your sense of utilizing desaturated color is, I mean, immediately there.
Oh, thanks. I mean, to me, this feels like it's basically black and white comics, because I'm just working with tones. But I mean, just throwing a bunch of red on something makes it look good.
As far as that young man attitude, I want to read this from the outro. Well, no need to stop for me. From the outro of King City. Be a man, even if you're a 12-year-old girl. I drew for years without owning a desk. Be ready to draw anywhere. Bust out your own best work anytime. The best thing about comics is that it takes no money. You could steal pens and paper and make the best comic ever sitting in a dumpster. This is the fucking trenches. If I see you cry, I'll knife you myself. Don't you die. Get on your feet, soldier. That's all. It's time to do up some real comics. Excelsior, bitches. I mean, presumably that's what kept you away from the computer?
I mean, it's funny to even think about like pre-computer life. Like I didn't have an email till I was 24. And I still have the same Hotmail email there.
Yeah, I'm kind of embarrassed by the old Gmail that I'm still stuck with, but it gets too hard to change at a certain point, right?
Yeah, Rob. When I was working on Profit, Rob Liefeld has an AOL email still, which I always thought was amusing.
One thing in the earlier chapters that in the early black and white stuff that gets set up is that having the werewolf penis is giving Nick wolf dreams, and it shows up here and there. I feel like out of all of your books, Multiple Warheads is the one that's still quite open for you to return to. Like there's concepts like this that aren't fully, I don't know, I don't feel like they've seen the end of what's being said here, but I'd be more interested to hear more about like the numbers on the snakes and just this concept of
he's a snake by numbers.
The idea with snake by numbers is that he was basically basically the idea is that if you're going to kill him, you have to do it by the numbers. You have to stab him in 1 and then 2 and then 3.
Oh wow, that's difficult because they're spread all around. Like 2's up here and 5's there and 3's there. 3 and 4 are right next to each other. You made that one easy.
Yeah, I think this is the pun that I was trying to.
But the concept of like how a dog dreams, that's interesting to me as well. It's one of these things that I see show up in a lot of your work, like even changing the body parts, giving you new perspective, like trying to imagine how a dog perceives the world. There seems to be a lot of that embedded in your work as well.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, and it's a weird thing too, because I got really, you get really kind of connected to stories you're doing. And I remember like having the werewolf dreams was implying that the wolf is murdered at some point and his penis is cut off and given to Nikolai.
Right.
So I had a whole story. Yeah, I didn't kind of reach the end of that storyline. And also the little child that he's going around with, Alexander, like what happens to him. There's a lot to be done, and I definitely want to get back to multiple warheads.
Okay.
Definitely in
That's
book, if we get to book 2, like I feel like I left the story at a resting point, but it's still a lot more that I want to do.
Yeah, I had that same feeling too. Like this could be the end, but there's a lot more there. That's something that, like when we talk about scale with your work, I don't think I fully understood your work until I recently read the Prophet stuff, which I'd only read the beginning of it, and I was reading it as it was coming out issue by issue, and I got lost because there's so much information. When I read it all in a chunk, it's like, oh my God, this guy is operating on such a massive scale story-wise that he's willing to throw away like entire galaxies. You get 4 panels and then you move on, because when you are operating at that scale, you can toss ideas like that. And now I go back and reread your other work, and I see that same sense of narrative scale in everything, where you're so willing. Like I was actually telling Tori last night, I said, I had a student ask me about creative block, and I said, I don't know, there's people like Brandon who will throw away every 3 panels, could be a whole 30-year-long manga series. And so I'm curious about hearing about that too, like scale in a narrative term from you.
Yeah, I mean, thanks first of all, but there is a lot about storytelling that I think can essentially work in, like, I think of it like you don't have to create everything whole cloth. You can kind of just, you can have a 3-panel sequence, and in your head you can be like, it's like this series that exists, I'll kind of do it like that. Like you guys saw Star Trek, this is like Star Trek, and you're almost doing like shorthands like that, and you don't have to do everything yourself, but there's my bad joke about running into myself in the future in my butt car.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about this, because this is 2013 Brandon talking to 2007 Brandon.
Yeah.
2013 Brandon thinks, man, maybe I drew too many butts in this comic. What does 2023 Brandon think?
I
More or
think
less
so.
butts?
I should mention, so the big drawing on that page is my ex-wife Marion did, a fantastic artist. Something that my relationship with Marion that was really a weird thing that I'd be interested to ask you guys about is I'm always very public about my relationships and my work, and I don't see other artists do that, and it's always confusing to me, because I'm always like, how do you not talk about the person you hang out with all the time
Right.
in your
Yeah.
work? And also, is it weird that it's in my work?
But see, I think that's what, especially since we're kind of promoting Moonray here, knowing you now, like personally knowing you, I can see that in the work more now, and especially with Moonray and Rain Like Hammers, I think that makes them such powerful works that, like, especially with Moonray, it's a licensed product, but
Sure.
it's so personal still, and that gives it some kind of like the depth that we were talking about, where it's not just about the breakup story, but it is like life lived kind of coming through. So no, I mean, I think more people should be vulnerable like that, right? Like that's what makes it impactful, rather than just like the next X-Men story.
Sure, yeah. Well, but to go back to your question, like essentially I was going to say, like, Marion was often very like I think in a positive way, she was very critical of how I drew women,
Mm-hmm.
and she wanted me to kind of like think about how I was portraying different women and stuff, and so I think the negative side effects is it made me a little cautious of like I would be doing stories in like the first chapter of Multiple Warheads. I think what I was a little embarrassed about is there'd be like a thing where Sexka is going to see if her if her partner has been killed by a spaceship crash in the city, and I had to draw a nice drawing of her ass in the panel where she's like, "Oh no, is he dead?" And then going back at it later, I was like, you know, like I don't know if that suits the mood. It's like my wanting to draw a pretty girl was like getting in the way of me wanting to convey.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's a little farther than that one. But I don't know. I've softened a little bit on that stuff now, because I often think that like it's okay just to have fun in comics, and I think kind of just the general kind of pearl clutching that goes on in modern day comics makes me much more like back then I was being very critical of myself, like you don't need to sexualize everything all the time, and now because of so much kind of pearl clutching and people complaining constantly, I'm just kind of like, it's fine. I was having fun.
So 2023 Brandon has circled back around a little closer to 2007 Brandon.
Yeah. I mean, anything where someone's trying to make art and they're having fun and they're expressing what they're interested in, like it's important to try not to do, like I don't want to dehumanize women at all in my work, but they're also cartoon characters that I'm drawing, and it's okay to do what I want to do. It's like I'm not treating a person a different way because of it.
Well, why have developed all of the writing and drawing and coloring skills that you have if not to get your characters to serve the whims of your story and your art, right? I mean,
on some level, certainly, yeah. I mean, but I was always really happy with a lot of like female readers of my stuff seemed to really like the Sexka character in there.
yeah, and I think that was a time too where there's a lot of dialogue about how personality is more important than a lot of these other types of things. You have somebody like Colleen Coover who made really amazing porno comics that were like incredibly fun and well drawn and like visually engaging, and like she drew the thing that she wanted to see, and
So,
it doesn't
Small
like
Favors, right?
what's that?
Oh, small. I was trying to remember the name of it. It's called Small Favors.
Yeah, Small Favors, right? Yeah. Yes. I mean, then who's gonna are you gonna criticize Colleen Coover for drawing the porn comic that she wanted to see? I mean, that's
Yeah, well, I mean, something that was really interesting that Marion would talk to me about is the idea of almost choosing my battles because I would oftentimes just draw like a sketchbook page that was just like, here's a rendered picture of Ernest Hemingway's face and then a naked girl on all fours next to it. And she was like, maybe do this on separate pages. And I was like, that's reasonable, but I don't know. The more I think my 2023 version of things is like, I feel like there's something subversive about just doing what you want and having fun with it.
yeah.
And it's reasonable to be critical of yourself, but also like just let yourself have fun. Like it's like the world is, life is ending fast enough. You might as well enjoy some things.
Well, and you're the person who's going to have to be drawing the damn thing. I mean, I mean, if you did not draw that pagoda, clearly, I called it the pagoda, but it's actually what it's not. It's a mushroom.
It's the Liverpool.
We'll call it a pagoda. There's the misogyny parlor that I was very happy with that stupid pun. Where guys get back rubs and complain about women.
But see, this is the kind of thing where if you're censoring yourself, you're going to take something like that out.
Sure.
Right. Or even the juxtaposition of, who'd you say, Hemingway next to the girl on all fours.
Yeah.
There was some mental association potentially that got from one to the other. And there's information in there, whether it be that the audience could get out or just something where while you're doing that self-exploration, when those things pop up, that's like the most unfiltered information. It's the realist.
Sure. Oh, those are moss cows by your thumb, by the way. They're cows made out of moss. And and on the left-hand side, there's the famous portrait of all the different communist figures, and on the far right is the crab, who's kind of like the leader of the country that they're in this comic.
The advertisement for the misogyny parlor is, of course, screaming out all very loud. Another shout out to the Communist Party of China. These bullhorns on the top of the cars. We are right. You are wrong and fat. Also, don't be too smart. Nobody likes that.
Run,
I would
die
never
like
let
man.
I would never let a woman mow my lawn unless it was in the kitchen.
But yeah, like that's the kind of shit that if you start to get too worried about other people's opinions, you'll never put it in there.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
So I mean, look, the thing I was trying to get about the color stuff is, other than this being slightly more saturated than your typical modern palette, this seems pretty spot on to how I would imagine you coloring this today. Am I off base?
Yeah, it's pretty. My coloring hasn't. I've gotten a little more, maybe a little shifted in color, but yeah, no, it's pretty much how I would do things. Something I was trying to do with this series was to color code things a lot. So it's like every time the character Blue Nura, like she has a motorcycle and it makes blue sound effects.
Right.
And the main characters have a car. It has a name. Their car.
The Vladimir.
Yeah, Vladimir. Like it has red sound effects all the time.
But where did you like, how is it just from looking at the European stuff? Like, where did this sensibility come from? Because it's so different than anything else that would have been out at the time.
The color, yeah, no, I mean it's that's all just kind of Tintin and Mobius coloring.
Okay. The only other like American person I could think that's kind of working like this, but it doesn't make any sense as a leap, is Chris Ware, with some of his more like, yeah, use of grayer colors. But
yeah, and I never connected with Chris Ware comics. I can kind of see that he's talented, but it's kind of too much of a bummer for me, honestly.
They are, yeah, for sure.
So what do you I'm also curious, like the flat aspect of it, like literally having all the colors flat, and you deviate somewhat from that in Moonray, in that use a lot of gradients, very subtle gradients that you don't necessarily even notice until you're aware of them being there. If somebody held a gun to your head and said, we're going to publish this exactly as is, but we're going to make an applied texture across the entire thing, like what's your like visceral reaction to that? Like, fuck you, pull the trigger, or is it purely practical? Like what's the skin?
Oh no, it's an aesthetic choice, very much so, because for me a lot of it, I think, kind of because I was coming from a lot of like black and white, Matt Howarth comics or whatever. I want the lines to carry the art and not the color, because I feel like a lot of the kind of mainstream comics coloring you see, it's like it's so rendered that it almost like makes the lines, it kind of takes the weight out of the lines, and I feel like the majority of time I'm spending on these pages is with a pen inking the thing, and then the coloring is just like a 15-minute quick process, and that's kind of what I wanted. And I just think it looks a lot better. It feels like the weird thing about kind of highly rendered coloring is it feels like it's a lot of work to make something look bad, and and there's versions of it that look great, but I kind of, and I don't know if I fully understand it, and I don't know why people want to do that.
Yeah, I feel the same way the older I get, because like you said, it subverts the line. Like when you look at Moebius's stuff colored flat, you can see how good he is. When they render it, like when they did that recolor, I was like, why are people so into Moebius? This book fucking sucks. This guy can't draw, like their characters are all weird, his proportions are shitty, but you flat color it and it looks amazing. But I'm surprised to hear you say that you spend so much time on the line part of it, because to me the color is such a key part of like the Brandon Graham look, that's like the throwaway part is interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I spend stuff on color. Oh, I should mention this, guys. So the idea is the main characters are kind of in this like Russian Russian society, and this is the way the French people look in this comic.
Right.
Well, this was one where I made a note. I said, "You're so willing to throw away gold." Like, this guy comes up, you just told me this explanation for him that I don't think is in the book, and then you cut off his head and go away from him. And it's like,
I
man,
also
I
don't
could
want to
read.
draw that. That's a horse in golden armor. Like, I don't want to draw that over and over.
But
I might have
it's
just
like,
murdered him to save myself. I mean, a bunch more of those guys show up, but
yeah, eventually. But it looks so cool, and you'll just toss away these things, and over time, though, it really makes, like I said, this sense of scale. Like, none of this stuff is precious, but it's all amazing.
oh, thanks. And that was me trying. I think I was drawing the Louvre on the back of it. Right? That's the idea there.
You like cities on top of mobile animals too. I've noticed that in going and rereading stuff.
Oh yeah, I don't know where that comes from, but it's fun to draw.
Yeah, it's an interesting image. I've only seen a few different unrelated places. I had a college professor who was an illustration guy who did these giant size ink washes with men trying to lift themselves up with bristling buildings coming out of their backs. And Laurent Coupé, a French artist who's going to be doing a book with Living Line, has got a few similar images in his book. But yeah, it's a weird idea. It's nice. The turtle lifting the earth, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a artist whose name I'm spacing on who did some great pictures of floating buildings that I always kind of equated to that.
Mm-hmm.
It not a big influence on me, but somebody who, when I saw it, I was like, oh, that guy. That's probably where I got this from.
Well, there's a single image distillation of some of the scale shift fuckery that we've talked about, because obviously any animal that can support itself is by definition smaller than a city or a building.
Sure.
You kind of abbreviate the scale interest into a single image, in a certain kind of way.
Yeah, certainly.
Where did that come from? Because that's also, I think, pretty particular to your work, and not many artists' hand. I think the only person that I can think of that really can make things feel bigger than you can is Juan Jimenez. Like, he can get you to feel like the scale of planets and shit like that. But there's not many other people that do that, and I'm curious how you think about that when you're creating it.
I mean, there's certainly a lot of like the person that comes to mind the most is what's my brain? The guy that started Heavy Metal Hurlant with Mobius, Philip Droulet. Droulet, I think is like really amazing at scale. Yeah. And so there's certainly guys that are good at it. Something that I'm surprised by in American comics is I always make 2-page spreads, like, to show as much scale as possible. And I always think it's really surprising when you're reading like a Walking Dead comic or something, and they'll have a 2-page spread and it'll just be a character's face being like,
close-ups. Yeah, like they just tossed it away.
Yeah, and I'm like, why isn't that like what you? A part of it might be that I think of these things as days, and like a 2-page spread for me is a day's work, where normally a single page is a day's work. So it's almost like cutting corners to do something larger, and so you want it to look bigger.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and you can think about it in real estate terms. You are expending 2 pages of your story in order to get this thing in. So I'll be damned, it should not be a close-up of somebody's face, especially given the designs of lots of people's characters that don't really hold up to that kind of close-up scrutiny in the first place.
Oh, certainly.
I mean, this is a historical flaw of good cartoon design too. You read Gasoline Alley and it's wonderful, and you think, oh man, amazing art, amazing designs, and then he'll have a single. He'll almost never do it, but he'll have a close up of Baby Skeez's face that takes up an entire panel, and you're like, oh no.
But that's the interesting thing about Hergé is in Tintin he never has close ups.
Right.
Yeah,
because he knows.
They'll show hands close up, and they have nails, and they're like detailed. That makes you think that their faces would be terrifying.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, if Hergé had done close ups of Tintin, I mean, he would have looked like a 24-year-old man with stubble on his chin and cigarette hanging out of his mouth.
That reminds me, I just had a big discussion with my girlfriend because we collaborated on a short story,
which is fantastic, by the way.
Here's the art for the cover for for the thing. And in the short story, this character has no nose, and she insisted that if I was going to do the closer up cover version, that I actually gave them a nose.
Tell people where they can get that, by the way, because you sent it to us to read, and it's fantastic.
Oh yeah, so I just did a 3-page story, which is basically about some cartoon characters that go to a comic book party, and it's going to be in a Told to Tell anthology that I think you can find by going to the Told to Tell Instagram page where he's going to announce it. They're doing a really limited print run. I think it's going to be like 200 copies, but I'm probably going to reprint it in a diary book that I'm going to be doing with Living the Lie in the next year or so.
You heard it here first, folks.
Announcing all kinds of things. A new artist you just announced, Brandon's diary comic.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I suppose we haven't talked about Laurent Coupe's book yet either. Yeah, that's
yeah. Just announced that.
We just letting everything out of the bag, Brandon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it somewhere. Yeah, and I'm going to put my Old Man Tintin book in print in that diary thing that I'm doing with you. And I was thinking, because I had this weird thought. So I did that short story that I mentioned, and it's set at a comic book party, and I didn't normally have these kind of things, and people will be like, here's Superman, and he's not quite Superman. But I had this idea when I was drawing it. I was just like, oh, this is a very limited print run. No one will see this. I can just draw actual characters that are from real comics in this. And it's occurred to me, like, when we reprint it and reprint the Tintin thing, like I hope nobody notices it, but we'll see.
It's okay as long as it's a certain percentage, right?
Yeah,
no more than a certain percentage.
Parody laws.
You just tell them that normally you would spell it wrong in a parody. Well, this isn't a parody. This is a parody.
I was telling you guys about, I read that Carver comic recently where Corto Maltese is just a side character in it, which is really fun to see.
Don't tell anybody that. I mean,
sorry.
Let's just call him Mordo Maltese.
Carto Maltese.
Yes, I mean the color palette here, as wild as it is, it shows up in a scene in Moonray. We won't give too many spoilers, but this is very reminiscent of the interior of the Xanacam scene, the reuniting scene, Brandon.
Oh, sure.
Except you get a kind of Dr. Seuss flavor there with the spiraling, like swirling architecture behind him.
Oh yeah, the Xanacam thing. The idea I was trying to do in that is it was like almost being inside of a lava lamp or something. So it's kind of similar colors.
And can you explain more about, like, this character becomes really important? And I think this is partially where the Multiple Warheads gets its title from. Is that correct? Because in the second volume, they've got like the warhead itself that someone's carrying around in a bucket, but they've chopped.
Yeah, I think it shows up in this volume. But yeah, so that character there's a million clones of this guy called Marks. They're Marked men, and he's this kind of just cocaine aristocrat version of it that Nura carries around with her for a while.
And is that where, because there's multiple of that's part of the Multiple Warheads? Yeah,
that was an idea. I mean, another kind of theme through my stuff, I certainly in Prophet and in this, and even in Moonray, is kind of multiple versions of a person that live different versions, and in Rainlight Cameras, kind of seeing different versions. And I think that's kind of in line with the idea of like your experience is changing because of your body. It's like also your you could be the exact same person and make different decisions and go off in a million different directions. So I always think it's fun to show like what happens with the same character making different choices.
Well, it's really interesting because that was when I read Multiple Warheads. I was just like, man, you have kind of addressed like every standard philosophical thought experiment on identity. And then when I talked to you about it, you're like, wow, I never read any of the philosophy about that. You're just coming to it on your own. But that's one of the standard thought experiments, is like, if you cloned your brain into 5 different bodies and then they went and experienced different lives, are they still you, or are they now different people? Right. And that does come across very clearly in your work. So it's interesting to see someone who will at least tell me that they're not reading that stuff coming to all the same conclusions. I mean, is that just a lifelong obsession for you, that topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to not think about that, especially when, um, yeah, when they're like, oh, I don't know if I made the right decision in this situation. Let's, I wonder what would happen to my life if I did different situations.
And you seem to use your work to kind of run those scenarios for yourself in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's all kind of like ideally, I think it works as kind of a diary and art therapy.
Hmm.
Anything I do, so it's like um, I want to find ways to talk about real things in the work. I mean, it's like you're the one that has to, I'm the one that has to spend um all the time with these comics. So I have to if it's helped me figure out my life, then even better, right?
What do you think there's any risk of figuring it out and then like not having anything left to say?
No, I mean life doesn't get easier as you get older, right?
No, definitely not. I've always wondered though if like an artist answers that core question that's driving them, do they quit?
I mean, imagine
Or
some people find I was thinking about that recently, like the other day I just had this thought where I was like, most people don't need to make comics to be happy. And I was like, what a weird idea that I could at some point just find another job and go on and do something else. And I'm not going to, but the idea that there's people that just like get what they want out of doing a certain type of art and just are like, I want to go on and do something totally different, and I don't want to talk about these things anymore.
yeah, I've always wondered if I could reach that point, if I want to reach that point or not.
Sure.
Like there's been times where I feel like I finally answered my own questions, but then inevitably I'll come up with some new question. And then it's like, oh, well, now I have another 20 years worth of work to do.
Yeah, because there are questions you get kind of bored with. Like whenever I see the science fiction question of like, "What's the soul?" I'm always like, "This is the
Yeah.
most boring thing imaginable." So there's some things that I find uninteresting and to investigate, but I think that the kind of multiple life paths is always going to be interesting.
uh,
Yeah, because we're presented with that every day, right? Every
Yeah, and you're
second.
also dealing with multiple facets of yourself. So if you have like a story where there's 20 different versions of one person, you can almost be talking about um, like how you feel very different in different situations.
Hmm.
So it isn't necessarily about making decisions, just about there's a pun I was very happy with in these pages because I go through the she has like he goes to the whole this guy only speaks in alphabet or something.
Hmm.
And so he's like C, it's like the letter C, and she says I see, and then she um shoots him with a knockout spray and he says X, Y, and Z. Like X
Yeah.
is the knockout.
And then I mean you're even keeping it up. Kay got it like throughout that's where I put a note there because I went back to the rap, like the kind of formal play with language that happens in rap. And I know you're very into like the formal play of comics. Is
Sure.
there some kind of connection there in your head?
Yeah, I mean when I was making this especially and still like I really like the puns in rap.
Hmm.
Um I mean I've softened a lot on doing puns in the work. Like there's very few in Moonray, but a lot of
Hmm.
that is just like I I think it's one way to tell a story, but I'm also like I've done that. Let me try other things now.
Hmm.
Yeah, and if we could compare tone wise, I mean, I think it's safe to say that Moonray sits in a different place tonally than a lot of the work that you've written before.
Yeah, I mean Moonray is almost more profit than anything else,
Right.
but different in the sense where I'm not really trying to um like I feel like profit was really like leaning into this science fiction um like kind of where is humanity going, and I'm letting Moonray be kind of just this kind of emotionally
Right.
wandering through a weird world in a way that I kind of haven't done before.
Yeah, I mean, and you sort of linger. Not that there isn't the same kind of shotgun spray of concepts, but you linger on things longer. Not to say another term that nobody's going to know for another month or two, but the Xanacam sequence, for instance, again, there's time for breathing, and like we are hanging out in this weird place, and what is it exactly that we're experiencing? It's not like the narrative is constantly pushing them forward. at all times, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Moonray's so weird. Like I guess the core concept is like it's way after physical humans have stopped existing, but they've transferred their consciousness into these like god beings that then
Right.
when they die, it doesn't stop the material they're made out of is called mium, and that mium continues to hold on to the essence of kind of who they are. So that mium it can then reform to these new like post human creatures that kind of don't know there's any connection to humanity, and it's them kind of wandering around trying to figure out their lives.
Right.
And that sets up the mechanism, because this is a licensed property that kind of creates the world and mechanism for a blockchain based video game, correct?
Probably. I don't know how blockchain based it is anymore. It's
Yeah, that's
because it's expanding in a lot of different ways, and that was kind of a thing of a moment that yeah, but essentially it's uh is this concept that this guy Rodrigo Pachicho came up with, and it's just this very weird science fiction world that they came to me to kind of flesh out, and now it's going to be a video game and hopefully an animated show and a comic book, and it's weird even it being a license thing because it is, but it's like I have as much freedom as I
right.
had on like Profit or anything where it's like I've dabbled a little bit in licensed things that where there's a very strict way to handle things, but for the majority of things I've been handed, it's always just like do whatever you want with this, and that's very much Moonray and Profit.
And the medium though is like part of, it's like the character's life force in the game is kind of what I took away from reading Moonray, that the medium is related to the game mechanism in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, basically the idea is that it's the living material that all the sentient beings or most of the sentient beings in it are made out of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then it gets really weird when you start thinking about like if this is just a material that can be a liquid or a solid
Right.
and it has a consciousness, like what can you do with that? And that's where the Xanacam comes in, because the Xanacam is essentially a like a giant man that people live inside of.
Right.
Mm.
And he's conscious, and there's like a city that's also conscious that's made out of the same material, and just kind of playing with a bunch of ideas. And I mean, not to get, I mean, I guess it does relate to multiple warheads in the sense that
Yeah.
I'm playing with ideology, like
Mhm.
essentially religion and belief systems. Like multiple warheads, a lot of it is like living in a broken communist system, what it kind of would be like. Um, and Moonray's playing with the idea of like like what does a Buddhist society look like? What is a society that is like a collective look like? Like
Right.
and really kind of playing with and because it's a video game, and because it's going to be a video game, the idea that you can kind of choose ideologies, and just kind of I guess kind of living in modern America, I was really thinking about like how we're often sold the idea that like this is the right way and this is the wrong way to think, and there's not enough room for kind of investigating multiple ways to think, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And there's
We,
a balance between collective and personal, it seems.
Yeah, because initially I was thinking collective thinking was kind of the villain, but I think showing the how some people might think of a collectivist view as ideal for them is interesting to pursue too.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about that spread before we leave it, but I also
Yeah.
want to interject and just say we both Brandon and I separately were interviewed by Publishers Weekly for an article about video game adaptations, or comics that relate in some way to video games. And one of the things they did not include that I gave her a big juicy pull quote was I basically said that almost all game adapted comics are shit. Because they're not made to be comics. They're made to be adaptations or advertisements for games. And the way that you make good comics is by making good comic creators and giving them the basic thing and saying, do whatever the fuck you want. And for some reason, that didn't make the Publishers Weekly.
I wonder why next to all the, be like, here's 6 comic book things that are coming out. Something I did learn from that article that was interesting is the Tilly Walden book is bizarre looking.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's like they took like a YA author that does like pretty personal work and just gave her a Walking Dead character based off the Walking Dead video game, but not the comic book.
It's really weird. It is a weird one.
I mean, I hope they just handed her a suitcase of money, but it just seems like that could be a good way to do it. I mean, that might be kind of great.
That might be the type of thing. Well, I haven't read it yet, but that's the type of thing that I was trying to get to with her. It's like, look, you want to look at great video game comics. They have only come out in Japan, and because that's the only place where they'll just be like, we trust this guy. Go paint this Zelda thing. You know what I mean? Like, you should use the characters' names, okay?
I wonder if there's been any, because there's probably been 1 million Tomb Raider comics in America. There might be a good one. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, maybe. So this spread right here, when I have talked about you as an international artist, and I think that the cohort of people that you were sort of, coming in and out of, this was like an international wave of cartoonists. This is the type of image that I'm thinking of, because on the one hand, you have a color combination that could exist in like southern Italy with these terracotta, tops of houses with the green. On the other hand, you've got this like clearly like Buddhist related imagery with the faces on the side here, and then you've also got even just like the Dutch style windmill, the Chinese buildings that almost look like they could be made out of like mud wasp daubs on the side of the thing. It's like it's not just the style, it's also sort of the design aspects of it. So I mean, are you sitting there with just your favorite visual imagery? Is this come directly out of the setting? A spread like this, like, is this totally dictated by the story, or is it like the thing that you want to draw this week and you happen to see something that you're pumping in that gives it that liveliness?
I mean, I think for this one, it was that I could do anything, and I got really into the idea. So this is an idea where we were talking before about kind of putting something in the story and then it being a throwaway idea.
Right.
I got so into this scene here, the Wailing Wall is what I call it.
Right.
It's just like a wall, a cliff's edge that they have a bunch of flying whales by, and I got really into the idea of there being kind of like these bird creatures and mole creatures that all live in the same community. That I basically stuck here for the rest of the series. Like this scene lasts until book 2. Like they don't like, it was meant to be like an issue, but I had too much more I wanted to investigate in this.
Yeah, and book 2 is like, it was almost odd for me in terms of pacing compared to what I'm used to in your story, because you do stay in that one place and you like follow. I guess King City has that too, where you're kind of following the characters cycling each other on top of one another. But this book very, very much felt like it's following a map to a certain place, and then I feel like they took a vacation, and then book 2 is like vacation, and then it's left open to whether they decide to keep going or not.
Yeah, my brain still threw a heist in there. Like I was trying to get away from a lot of these like trope things, and then I was like, this comic needs a heist. But I think I guess to answer your earlier question, Sean, I imagine when I drew that, I probably just had like a bunch of National Geographics next to me, and I was just like, what would be fun to draw on this thing? And definitely like windmills. Like I definitely wanted to have these I guess something I should mention also about Warheads is the idea for a lot of it was that it's like if fairy tales and kind of fantasy world got to the modern day, where it's like there's dragons exist and everything, but then they develop the radio and they have cars and everything. So a lot of it's kind of approaching that mentality.
And that's, Sean, when you're calling out like kind of not just culturally the different types of buildings, but the different styles, like there is some of that Miyazaki-ness to this as well, where he's kind of always drawing like the edge of an island and he's got a weird mix of like he really loves like old German kind of city architecture, obviously, but it's still very
Yeah,
Japanese. And
he's on the he and Brandon are both on the very short list of people who I kind of consider in this category. The other Japanese artist it would be Taiyo Matsumoto, who who did like Number 5 and Black and White. And were you aware of him at the time either, or was this just a you know what?
I remember it was funny. My introduction to Taiyo Matsumoto is people were accusing me of ripping him off when I first
first heard
I was
about
like,
him.
I haven't actually read his stuff, and they checked it out, and I was like, oh, I think this guy reads the same comics I do.
Right.
Yeah.
That's was my impression. Is not that you guys would have had any influence back and forth, but purely just you guys both have cosmopolitan Catholic interests, you know.
Yeah, well, he was supposed to be an island before it died. The
Wow.
comics magazine I was editing.
Yeah.
He released a comic, or he was going to release a comic that his editor sent me the first chapter of it, and the idea was to put it out in America, Europe, and Japan simultaneously. And Ireland was kind of one of the only places that was serializing anything,
Right.
here, which is a weird statement on just American comics, because
Yeah.
now there isn't a thing like that at all.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's Oni has an anthology that looks like they saw Ireland once and wanted to do it.
The new Xeno book, Xino.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has that vibe. But I always thought Island was really, I think I told you this, and I think I probably just told Sean last night that was the only thing that really felt, because of the review that Moonray got, where it was talking about like, this is really heavy metal. It's like the closest you can get to heavy metal without just being like ripoff, it carries the spirit forward. And Island was that for me. It's like the most heavy metal feeling thing I had read since like maybe mid 90s heavy metal, or even earlier than that.
Certainly the hope. Oh, that was a page I had a lot of fun with. That's up there now is the
Yeah.
the just doing the hotel menu and just doing like letting myself I let myself meander much more on pages than I do these days. These days I'm much more like, I got a day to get this page done. And back then I'd be like, this menu is going to sit on my desk for a week while I come up with little puns on everything.
This next spread is probably my favorite in the entire book, even more than the first wall. And I take back what I was saying about the color being fully formed, because I actually don't think that you did a lot of like color holds or dropping the line prior to this issue.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Oh, something that I wanted to touch on before is you're talking about kind of for a while I was calling it world comics, like comics that are kind of influenced by all over. I think Paul Pope is a really big artist in that and that type of stuff as well.
Right.
His stuff is so European and American and manga. But something really cool, I think, when you look at the DNA of a lot of stuff, like like back to Hergé, like Hergé was looking at Japanese printmakers to get a lot of his color schemes. And so I think when, especially on Moonray, I started looking at the same like Japanese printmakers that Hergé was looking at, and kind of like going to the source was allowed me to change up how I was doing color and be like, oh, that is amazing how these guys did it, because they were doing they were doing like woodblock prints, and they weren't as limited to like I think with Hergé he was much more like he was kind of doing the shorthand version of what they were doing.
Right. And that was probably, I mean, I imagine that was the inspiration to incorporating mild gradients as well.
Yeah, certainly. And a lot of it is just like, I didn't learn to do a lot of things because I didn't think they were necessary. And so just knowing how to do gradients and getting more comfortable with them, is it's like, why not? Like, gradients exist in reality. I might as well see what, and I got really into doing like sunsets and sunrises in Moonray.
Right.
I was going to say, this is the most indicative of what's in Moonray, where there is a lot more just described with color, and you get like these fog effects and things that are, like this is like the most comparable, I think, to what's in Moonray. This is like a preview of how you start to use color in that book, which is a really interesting leap forward, I think. I mean, obviously you've done it before, but I think you've like really landed that now.
Well, and we should if you're going to be up for it when Moonray is actually out, if you wouldn't mind dissecting a page or two with the color, because I had not since I did the pre-press on the book, I'd never actually seen one of your layered files before. I had not realized, I'm not going to give away the secret here. I had not realized how you use layers to manipulate previous layers that you've already created. You know, I'm seeing a little bit potential of that here. Like certain color combinations, let's say, that are created by overlapping layers in a way that you might not expect.
Oh yeah, I use the multiply layer a lot, and I am really into the idea of like seeing what happens when you just put like a gradient over a panel and then multiply it and mess with the levels.
So yeah, I mean, if you wouldn't mind, it might be an interesting, like, you know, 15-minute dive into a couple pages to just see your actual file and go through. You know, is that the nerdiest thing in the entire world?
Yeah, that would be fun. It'd be interesting to get, you know, EPHK that we were talking about the other day, Electric Prick, who did.
Right. He's fantastic.
Yeah, he's a fantastic artist. He was actually running me through the way that he colors stuff, and it's a much more it's a better way than what I do. And I did a couple pages that way, and then I forgot how he was doing it. And I have an email from him somewhere that I need to go back and look at, because the problem with my stuff is if I click on the black line, like I'm doing everything, like I knock up the opacity so everything's like solid black, and then I basically click filling everything like coloring book. But if I hit a black line, then it fills everything. It fills all the black line behind everything.
Right.
And I have to go back and do it. And he had a way of doing it where that was not an option. You couldn't mess up your picture with the wrong click.
Is this an example of where you would like color all of this and then this is all one color plopped over on a multiply, like the shadow here?
Yeah, that's exactly that.
Yeah, so that's the way I always use Photoshop too. I would use like a dark color on a multiply to create shadows, and then I would use a normal layer like with a lighter color, adjusting it to make like a light source.
These days I do something slightly different sometimes, where I'll do a multiply layer and just select the color that I'm coloring, and then double that over on multiply. Like I'll color it over itself, and it creates kind of a different effect, because if you're doing it like I'm doing in there, then you can take one color and have it's like, what would a gray shadow over this whole thing feel like? But if you're just trying to make like a darker shadow of like a skin tone or something, it works well, I think.
You just take her skin and put it on top of itself again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm surprised you've never done that, Sean.
Yeah, well, I mean, my digital color has been pretty limited. It's mostly manipulating physical colors that I've done to, you know, and after the fact. I never found something that was satisfactory. You know, Brandon, you mentioned just, oh, that's just the way I like it. Like, you're just satisfied by it, right? Well, we've talked about many times on this damn channel, like, you are the person putting in 5 to 10 hours on a page. You are the person who's going to be satisfied or not, right? I just never found something digitally that was repeatedly satisfying. And so it's not, you know, maybe I would have felt differently about it if I had been in a situation where I could get actual good color printing at the time. That's probably a part of it, is just never being in a position where at the time that I was spending time experimenting that I could afford full color printing for a story, you know?
Yeah, certainly.
So here's the warhead. Can you tell us more about that, since it's the titular warhead that there's multiples of, I'm assuming?
Oh yeah, so he's basically like the head of a war robot that Sexica steals in an earlier scene from these guard guys, and he's been turned into a tea kettle. And I think I realized much later on that I came up with that. I think I was redrawing a panel of a British Alan Moore comic that just had a robot head on it, and I just did like a kind of cartoony Bender from Futurama drawing of it, and so it's pretty much loosely based off of Alan Moore. I don't remember who the artist was, but an Alan Moore character. And that one was really happy. That page on the right where the leg shadows are spell out chapter.
Yeah.
That one I just had a giant photography book, and it had kind of soldiers running in and together, and they had shadows like that. And I was thinking, like, that's another example of like visual storytelling that I could just make their shadows into a word. Did
you send Will Eisner a royalty check?
I should, yeah. That is a very Eisner Did Eisner do it with shadows? He must have.
Yeah, he
I
must have.
yeah, I think so. I think it's at least a few of those spirit splashes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was surprised when we first started talking back and forth how much you do acknowledge using photos at points in your process, because to me it just seems like this is all so fantastical, but you've talked about having like a photo of a city to get the perspective or whatever, and then you just kind of freestyle on top of that. Can you talk more about that? I think that would interest a lot of people.
Yeah, but I think what using reference does is it grounds something. So if you have like those glasses, for instance, like I don't think I used reference for those, or I probably did, but basically the idea is if you draw like what a real pair of glasses look like, or what a real cigarette pack like she's opening on the left there, then the more fantastical stuff becomes more believable. Like if you're, if you're drawing like a real car that then is driving next to a dragon, like that's exactly what I know what that it feels like to be in a car like that. So I think that's the advantage of using reference photos, and also just like seeing how much Mobius did it really like freed it up. Like he would just take a photo and redraw it exactly for a panel.
And we all tend to think of Moebius, and that's kind of how I thought of you as well, as someone who this is all entirely pulled out of the head and they would never look at a reference because you process it so much through what you do. And so you kind of cued me into that with your work, and his work is like, oh man, like even these guys are using it. I don't have to feel like my imagination is as lacking as I thought it was.
Yeah, well, like the whole world is there for you to pull from. There's no reason not to take everything from, everything you want to use from everywhere. If you go back a page, I did a chapter L there. I made the panels in the shape of an L.
Oh, the doubling up. Yeah, there you go. And can you talk more about the Nura character? Because this is one of those things where I don't think even in the second book that these two stories never come together, right? They're kind of two parallel storylines.
Yeah, so I have a longer story for Warheads that I want to get to eventually, where eventually Nura and Nikolai start hanging out.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so in the original Oni Press issue 1 that's in here, the black and white one, Sexcom mentions Nura as another organ smuggler that she thinks is like really crass and doesn't do the job subtly as she does. And so I just like the idea of like showing like basically I wanted to show two characters who didn't like each other and make you the reader like both of them.
Mm.
And Nura was kind of my favorite part to write in these because she's just this kind of barbarian character that rides around on her motorcycle.
And it's like a brave thing, I think, to let that go for so long before those two characters meet up, because you're expecting, okay, by the time I get to the end of Vol.1, their stories are going to link up and intertwine somehow, and then they kind of don't, and it's like, oh, like that's a really
A lot of it
like
is I just kind of like maybe with most of my stories I kind of don't know what I'm doing a lot of times, and I'll just be like, this is going this direction, and then be like, I often make the equation that it feels like balancing a broom on your hand and trying to run around the room. You just like you don't know where the story's gonna go. And Word's another one that I was like, I was struggling while I was writing it, kind of where I wanted to go with it and what I wanted to do with the kind of story, because I felt like I was trying to shed a lot of the trope stuff that I'd had in previous work.
oh,
I mean,
Brandon, you're
even
so
here, Sex is
perfect.
talking about like how her old life was like a, a snake shedding its skin.
I had that. I had the note tagged on that, and then you just said sheds, and I was like, God damn, dude, what a segue. Yeah, I did want you to, if you could expand on that, because this piece of writing really, really grabbed me. It said a snake is still a snake after it sheds. And I just
Yeah,
wondered
I
if
mean,
you could
I think that's kind of
extrapolate
what I
on that
was.
thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically what I was talking about. It's just like I mean, even just in like my storytelling, I can try to do very different types of stories, but they're always going to kind of be the kind of stories that I do. I probably told the story before, but I did the least accepted Vertigo pitch ever once, where I showed up at a Vertigo office with a stack of books that I'd done and just kind of slid it across the desk, and I was like, "This is what I do." Like, it's not going to be that different from this. Like, if you like these, you'll like something else I do, and if you don't like these, you won't like it. Because I just didn't really want to do the song and dance, and I think they really like the song and dance at places like that.
Yeah. Was that for a specific book that you were trying to get, or you were going to do like a creator owned?
I pitched a bunch of stuff to Vertigo that never flew. I wanted to do I had an idea for a Sergeant Rock comic where there was a guitarist who started getting I mean, maybe kind of akin to Warheads here, where he basically started dreaming of Sergeant Rock's life, and he was like a 60s guitarist, like a Jimi Hendrix guy, that then had this like connection, and it was going to be called Rock is Hell. So that would have been good, or so I'd pitch a bunch of stuff like that. I wanted to do a relaunch of Gen 13 where I replaced Grunge and Burnout with Brainiac 5 and Static Shock. I mean, luckily no one will let me near, like, there's no way in hell that anyone will let me touch a superhero comic, so it doesn't matter.
They gave you profit.
You would think that they would have been up for the Sergeant Rock one. Have you heard the XTC song Sergeant Rock is going to help me?
No, that sounds great.
It's fantastic. It's like sung from the perspective of like a 12-year-old boy, and it's a comic book enthusiast is the singer of the song, you know. And he said, Sergeant Rock is going to help me get the girls in line, you know, get to school on time. He's got this laundry list of things that are wrong with his life that Sergeant Rock is going to come in and help him with.
Sounds amazing.
Anyway, XTC, yeah.
Okay, I'll check that out.
But I was thinking that would be the theme song to your treatment for Sergeant Rock.
Yeah, it needs it.
Sergeant Rock is gonna help me. Yeah.
Yeah, it became. I probably talked about this a lot, but it became kind of hilarious how, I made this whole book, this escalator book that we should reprint at some point, Sean.
Oh.
And this was basically like all short stories that were done to bring into Vertigo to show them that I was doing stuff.
No, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, and there was a very awkward time once when I think it was the first multiple Warheads porn story I did. That was the only thing I had to show once when I went in to see Bob Schreck when he was at DC. And I remember as I was leaving, Klaus Janson, the anchor of the Dark Knight Returns, was coming in, and I heard them be like, "Hey Klaus, look at this guy's porn," and I was like, "Oh Jesus, I gotta not bring porn into these places anymore."
That's not the first introduction you want to Klaus Janson.
That was my first and last interaction with Klaus Janson.
What did he think of it?
I didn't stick around to see.
Oh, okay.
One time I did go into Marvel. I went into Marvel Comics to pitch once, and I went in with Becky Cloonan, and they were so excited to meet her and not excited to meet me. I remember I was standing between her and her boyfriend at the time, Vasilis Lilos, who also did comics, and I remember them introducing like Becky and Vasilis are at least a foot shorter than me. I'm 6'5", and I was standing between them, and I remember the editor, like Quesada, came out, and they were like, "Quesada, you need to. This is Becky, and this is Vasilis." They just ignored my existence, and then they gave them a tour of Marvel, and they were like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Mostly porn comics." I remember the guys being like, "Big fan of porn," and I was like, "I should."
I had no idea you were so damn tall. Now I'm scared of you, Brandon. You could squash me. Something else I wanted to ask about, because I put a note here, but also in King City, I had a number of notes where I thought, how in the hell is Brandon so prescient? So in King City, you had characters called TikToks, which are spelled exactly like the app TikTok. You also, way before the term Karen, like someone being a Karen, used the word Karen in exactly that, like Karens were exactly that type of thing in King City, which is now a common thing. And then here you have this poster where it's like, if we think that you think what we think you think, you better rethink your thoughts, which kind of seems to be a more standard thing that's happening now. So every time I'm looking back at your books, I'm like, man, where's this guy? And then he does Prophet. It's like, yeah, he is kind of. So like, do you look back on those things and go, where the fuck did I get that from?
It's probably more just 100 monkeys and 100 typewriters and me doing puns constantly, and then there's going to be things in there.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know that, or have you just forgotten them because you're running through so many of them? Do you go, hey, wait, like I talked about TikToks, or do you
I
not
remember
even
the
remember
TikToks. They're like the squids that they sell in King City.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
But when TikTok comes out, you don't go, hey, wait a second.
no, I didn't. That didn't occur to me until you mentioned it.
Okay, that's interesting.
This is of all your books. You know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just me reading into it, but this one feels the most like kind of Portland to me. In terms of you know, you're not like explicit. There's not explicit architectural references. So maybe it's just the sort of clash of the industrial and the post-Soviet stuff. You know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I drew this all in Canada, but I would go down and I would visit my friend Joe Keating, who we're working
Right.
with on Moonray now. I would go stay at his place in Portland oftentimes to visit publishers and things. So it's
Well, and I
definitely
think Portland would be like the most Portland and like Seattle and places are have most adopted like Canadian outlook. California's getting there too. So that doesn't surprise me, like the politics and things.
oh yeah. I mean, Seattle's always in my stuff because I grew up there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess maybe part of it is just the sort of the lifestyle that Sexica and you know that they have is this very Portland, Pacific Northwest kind of.
It's hippies, their lackadaisical lifestyle.
Yeah, no, that's not quite. Yeah, I don't know. The sort of like quasi legal like squatter, like we got our car and our pet, and you know,
Yeah,
Oh,
like the
so-
bohemian punk anarchist.
yeah.
There's
Yeah,
another Animal City.
oh yeah, the flying whale thing. I did a thing with this where I had to flip a sequence at some point in this. Like I had like kind of on the first spread, you really get a mapped out idea of what everything on the whale looks like. And so I tried to stick to that as much as possible. And at some point I had to flip it for an action sequence that happens later. And I remember having a big struggle with myself about like if this was an okay thing to do, and then being like, it's just make believe. People can, and I'm much more casual about that stuff now. Like I will, if a background doesn't suit a scene, I'll just change it from panel to panel.
I remember you mentioning that at some point during one of our Formalism Fridays or something. And when I was reading this scene, I was like, is that the one he's talking about? Because of like the way they're coming around corners and stuff like that. There was something that cued me in. So I'm really happy you answered that. Because I was pegging this one. I couldn't tell you where the switch happened. So even though I was looking for it, is this the one he was talking about? I didn't catch where you went off model. So it worked.
Okay,
Even
good. Yeah, I think the
for it
switch
didn't
happens.
find
There's
it.
a thing where they launch a explosive device into, or like a hook or something into the front of the ship. And I
Okay.
think that's when it is. So it's later on. But and here's a dice game I came up with. It was fun. I'm happy with that page layout.
And
these
I
are
also I
marked
really liked right here. You have a logic game. I used to love these in junior high where they give you like 6 characters and they give you like a chart to check off. And you got to figure out which character based on like Susie's sitting next to the guy with the red shirt. The guy with the red shirt's name is Dave. And you have that built in here into the dice game as well. There's like a bit of a logic puzzle. Have you ever played those games, or is that something that you're just coming up with on the fly as well?
Yeah, no, I remember those things. I always think about the like you know, the thing where you have two people, like this person always lies, this person always tells the truth, you know. I guess it's from Labyrinth is where I think of it.
Well, Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland has a logic puzzle like that, involving the two twins or whatever.
Oh, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Or,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I need to read that.
But yeah, so if we ever have a really nerdy comic convention sometime, we can play all of the games that are depicted in comics. So I can think of 3 off the top of my head. So we've got the dice game from Multiple Warheads. Now your contribution, Brandon.
I did a board game in King City too. But.
Right, the board. Yes, the board game in King City.
Well, there's like 4 games in King. There's like the board game. There's a crossword puzzle. There's a connect the dots.
And then if we're gonna, Cerebus has 2 different games. You've got
yeah, the card game. What's it called?
Diamondback.
Yeah.
And then you never get the formal rules. There's a girls' card game too that the girls play in one of the early issues, called like, I forgot what it's called. Dipsy Doodle or something like that. It's like a mock game, and the joke is that there's 800 pages of explanation before you can actually play it. And then there's the game that they play with the badminton rackets.
The Bear and Cerebus play.
Yeah, it's like basically like violent badminton.
Yeah, right. And then doesn't like Don Simpson shows up at some point and sells some comic books?
Yeah.
That's why it's the Spider-Man where he's jerking off.
Right, exactly. The wanker.
The wanker. The wanker,
yeah.
This was one of my favorite puns in a book loaded with puns, the Mapple.
Oh,
where you split the apple open and it's a map. Really fun. What a world it would be. Apples would be, I mean, apples are already great, but Jesus.
Apples are the best. I was thinking of the Louis C.K. joke where they're talking about the Matt Damon movie where he's like, how do you like them apples? And he's like, oh, I knew this, I'm being set up by a clear antagonist, but god damn it, I do like apples.
And he's like talking about you have to be the guy that's writing the movie to write that scene for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I never understood that at all. It was absolutely opaque to me in every single way. I had no idea what that dialogue was about. I have no idea why he said it in the way that he said it, and why everybody reacted the way he did. This made no sense to me whatsoever.
You're like, I have these human creatures that I don't understand.
I don't know.
So this is where you think you flipped right here, Brandon?
Let's see. I don't know if it's that sequence. I think it's around there. Let me see. I think it's
they're like shooting a claw out to grab the tree.
You're gonna admit to your art crimes on camera?
Yes.
Can anyone figure out where Brandon reversed the layout of the whale?
I think it's the next scene after that. Or the next pages. So I have these puzzlemen show up that are gonna steal the heart from the whale. Also, the thing about this sequence is this is a one-armed naked guy who catches a knife in his teeth, and at the same time we're doing this, me and Simon Roy were working on a Prophet scene where John Prophet, one of the John Prophets, loses his arm and is naked in a massage parlor and catches a knife in his teeth. And I remember thinking how ridiculous it was that I was like doubling up. I used to make rules for myself, and one of my rules was like I can't do anything more than twice. So even though I was doing it the same month in 2 comics I was doing, I was like, that's fine. That's within rules.
I used to have that playing music. I was like, I'm never going to use the same drum beat anywhere in a song. Like, you got to change it at least a little bit. But those rules can be a little too restrictive sometimes too. So,
and those are the bored to death guys that blow up.
And here's Sean, the hammock.
Here's your hammock.
The life-saving hammock.
Oh yeah, this comic sponsored by hammocks.
Brings joy to everyone and makes sure that they get lots of satisfaction and relaxation out of their life.
Can you give the audience a little more context for your promotion of hammocks?
They paid me. No, I had 2 years of acid reflux that just wouldn't stop no matter what I did. I tried everything, and apparently all I needed to do was sleep in a hammock, because that's what I do now, and now I don't have reflux.
And so Sean now sleeps in a hammock that hangs directly above his wife on their bed.
So that page on the right is the panel I was talking about. I think basically the background on that center panel, if it was accurate, you would see something else behind them in the background.
Back here.
Go back to the 2-page spread of the whale. But I think I decided that it didn't work in that, so I had to flip it.
And this panel here where they're all, where's my bike?
Yeah, I think that's the one where I flipped it.
And they're yelling pirates. Yeah.
Richard Scarry joke, by the way.
What's that?
A Richard Scarry pun.
Oh, I do love Richard Scarry, so that one I might have picked up.
well, Richard Scarry's funniest storybook ever, the Pie Rats steal the pies from Uncle Willie, and Uncle Willie makes himself a dragon costume or alligator costume out of sewn palm fronds to terrorize them and get it back from him.
Nice. Yeah, Richard Scarry stuff is amazing. I think he's probably a big influence on my stuff.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean the sort of accumulated detail thing, you know, and labeling. I never thought about that as a potential.
Yeah, every time I look at his stuff, I'm just like, that's what I need to be doing. Mice
Right.
driving around in shoe cars. This is the way of the future.
I kicked around for the longest period of time the idea of making a book that looked exactly like a peak period Richard Scarry book, but was the life of Jesus Christ.
That would be amazing.
And it would be. I decided I couldn't actually say it was by Richard Scarry. I'd have to say it was like by Bernard Frightener, or something like that, you know, or Dick Frightener.
Even better.
would they be animals or people?
Yeah, no, they'd be animals. They'd look exactly like a Richard Scarry book. It would be called Dick Frightener's Best Life of Jesus Christ Ever.
What kind of animal is Jesus?
Best Passion of Christ ever.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Jesus would be, I don't know.
I did some preliminary drawings for it. I'll send it to you guys sometime.
He would be a mouse. He's Jewish.
Yeah, I had him as the raccoon, Mr. Raccoon from the Mr. Raccoon's Unlucky Day story.
That would be a great name for the crucifixion of Jesus. Mr.
Jesus Christ's Unlucky Day.
No, he looks like
on the cross, just like, I get myself in the wackiest situations.
Exactly. He looks like put upon the entire time, like, like his belt was getting caught in the door as the Romans were carrying him out. And
awkward. I'm gonna fumble my own crucifixion.
So Brandon, this is one of the pages, and it's interesting because now I'm flipping back between this page and this page to see if everything syncs up. But it's where your sense of where, like the map where the characters are at all the time, is like a recurrent motif that you use. And I'm surprised to hear that you're not into Chris Ware, because there's almost like an infographics mode in this that is similar to Chris Ware. But
I mean, sometimes it's probably just stuff too close to home is also, yeah. I mean, I remember seeing Chris Ware's sketchbook and being like, kind of blown away, being like, oh, this guy's actually really good. It didn't occur to me. And I saw some of his originals once at an art show and was like, oh, these are really good too. But there's this thing of the types of stories he tells. Like, there's this, like, I don't know, like a big part of it for me is it's kind of what we were talking about before. It's like we have to spend time with the stuff we're making, and he has so many stories that just like there's a story of his that relates a lot to a Mobius story. Well, I think where he does a story where a guy is depressed in his room, and then he's like, I'm gonna go on vacation, and he goes on vacation and he's just depressed in a hotel room, and that's the whole story. And there's a Mobius story where a guy goes on vacation and he doesn't understand why it isn't more exciting when he's on vacation. And then he takes off the mask that he's been wearing the whole time, and he finally can see the place for what it really is. And I get so much more from the Mobius story. It's like the Mobius story is almost just like the Chris Ware story, but then it's like, but be open to new things, and it goes a little farther, where the Chris Ware gives you no answers. And I think that's kind of the wall to hit with his stuff. But you're right, he does a lot of this stuff well.
But there's also, I get it as an artist, when people kind of veer close to some of what you're doing, it's easier to be more critical too. Like what's something you're really good at, when you see other people do it, it's gonna like, but like I know that. Whereas for me, it's like I don't know that.
Totally. Like there's a bunch of artists who like I've never really, like Taiyo Matsumoto work I've never really connected with. There's a bunch of people like, like Daniel Warren Johnson or something, where it's like I'm aware that I'm in the same lane as them, but I just don't look at their work.
Yeah, I would get that in grad school, where people will be like, oh, you must really like so and so, and be like, nah, I fucking hate his work. And they're like, but you guys are doing the same thing. It's like, yeah, that's why I don't like it. Like,
I wonder if there's I wonder if that is a thing that pushes it away almost.
Yeah.
And it might just be when two people are, but there's other people that arrive at the same place, you know, like a James Stokoe, like I love his work. And I think we do similar things in different ways. Yeah, so I don't know. It's probably really subjective about how you engage with somebody's work the first time.
This whole sequence here, just because of how kind of color coded the sequence is, I have strong associations with this with one of the early Moonray sections. I'm sure you know, Brandon, which section I'm talking about. Also a scene that takes place at night, you know, and similar, where the break is the light of dawn coming in here up at the upper panel, and it has a similar kind of break in the Moonray one. It just seems like you're so keyed into color, you know. It just seems like everything that you did without color must have felt in some. I mean, you know, you just refuted me, so I don't know why I'm arguing with you again. Must have felt like you were having one hand behind your back, you know, like you're not showing all your cards. But it sounds like it's just a different kind of mode for you, huh? Like,
yeah. I mean, I think when I work in black and white, sometimes there's a way that the black and white stuff kind of pops, which is really satisfying when done right. That is harder to achieve in color.
What do you, I mean, when's the last time you worked for something totally black and white? Would it be odd to go back after spending so much time with color?
I've done short stories. Like, I mean, even this book, I think, ends with a black and white story. There's like a 2-pager or 2 or 3-pager that I end it with. And that was done kind of later on. I think even farther than that.
Yeah, the very end, past the initial.
Yeah, like printed on the inside back cover.
Right.
Yeah, then you're using grays more than you did earlier on, it seems like, to fill in where the colors there.
I'm playing with tone in the way.
Yeah.
They use color.
Do you have, like, on these scenes like this where you really are tracking characters, and I think a lot in multiple Warheads too, where they're really running around this city, are you mapping that out ahead of time that's causing you to feel like, oh man, I shouldn't break that? Or was there some point where you were creating like floor plans and things for whole cities?
Not for whole cities, but certainly like for buildings, I have to draw them over and over. I'll just have like a sketchbook page that's a very ugly sketch of where everything could be.
But I mean, not like this whole tree city's not mapped out somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, for the whale thing, I mean, oftentimes I'll do the designs on the page. So for every time I was drawing the whale, I was looking back at the 2-page spread.
Right. Okay, so that becomes the design then.
Yeah, and I think that is the major difficulty in being a cartoonist, I think, and why I'm not cut out for animation is the repetition is always the difficulty thing. And if things go, like one of the things like Moonray, I did much faster than a lot of my previous work. And a lot of it is that I purposely don't have much repetition in there. Like they're constantly moving and they're in like environments that are alive and moving and things like that. So I don't have to be redrawing the whale and making every building the same it looks in every panel.
Right.
Is that a problem of like visualization? Because that's where I always get stuck. Like if I just take a pen and just go to it, I can come up with something cool. But then if I had to redraw it from another angle, it gets really difficult. And that's where you have to spend a lot of time erasing. And
yeah, and it's just size relation, right? Like you're just like, I want this window to be in the same place in this building every time. So I'm going to like be sectioning off exactly where it is. But then if you're drawing a new building, it's just like the windows can be anywhere. You know?
Yeah. That is my least favorite.
Rock stuff. I realized I got it all from, there's a Japanese porn animation and manga called Impressions of Europe. That when I was in middle school, I had an Impressions of Europe picture on my binder I would carry around, which just seems inappropriate now. But but I found the comic again recently, and it's so in line with all these like kind of floating, flying whales and floating rock things.
But you wouldn't have made that association until you like rediscovered that. That's just something that like snuck into your subconscious.
I mean, it's very much like a Mobius-y thing. You know, and there's that Flight anthology that came out years ago, and I was like, there's all these kind of flying whales. It's almost like this kind of like Miyazaki-ish flying whales was kind of the theme of the whole thing. I remember Tom Herpick, my friend who worked on a bunch of the Adventure Time stuff, he did a parody of the Flight comic that was just like some kids interacting with the flying whales and being like, "Life is great." He did it as like a joke, and he showed it to them, and they were like, "This is great. You guys got to do something for the next issue." So he did this amazing comic for one of the Flight anthologies.
Is there, I don't want to go too Freudian here, but you just connected these to like early experience with pornography, it sounded like, and I hadn't noticed it, but there's like titties on the bottom of this one.
Oh, sure.
Like, do you think there's part of that power there? Is that's like connected to this kind of early fantasy situation where it is a bit sexualized?
Maybe. I mean, I feel like I'm the kind of artist that if something kind of looks like a penis, I'll lean into it. I'll be like, let's make this more of a penis. So it is really, it might just be that rocks look like titties.
Yeah,
Right.
could be.
Yeah. One of the great universals.
There was a hike I went on with a friend where we were looking out at all the hills, and we were like, look, there's two breasts and there's only one tree on the top, each like nipples, and then there's a hill there. And we were thinking like, this was the first pornography, like way back when there was some caveman looking out over a landscape and being like, and that's where you get like the Mother Earth thing, is cavemen were like jerking off to landscapes, right? It had to have happened.
It's kind of, there's something kind of classy about jerking off the landscapes. Like, I'm old school.
Yeah, right. I always grind my own pigments, by which I mean I'm into landscapes. I grind my own pigments.
Oh man, how do we wrap this one up now?
Well, I mean, we wrap this one up by saying, Brandon, man, that is some nice work on this book, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. Churchill did an amazing job in it as well.
He sure did, and the back cover featuring some Sure Show work here, and also featuring a quote by somebody else here. Oh, look at that.
Oh, yeah. And I mean exactly what I say there. Brandon is someone who's continually improving, like is great. Like having just reread all your stuff, you're still getting better. Like Moonray still shows advancement. And I really, really do mean that there's something about you being let loose on a licensed property that's going to exist in these many forms and making it so personal. And then because you are looking forward to a future, it feels like something that could stick in the culture as a myth that processes. Like I feel like superheroes and all that shit are failing us right now, and I see a lot of media struggling to create a new collective story that we can all latch onto, because we've spent so much of the last 50-60 years tearing down our old mythologies. This feels like the first thing that could stick as like a collective story that helps people process where we're headed. And
I mean, it's really high praise, and I appreciate it. A friend of mine was telling me a while back this idea of like we really need hopeful futures.
Yeah,
I think there's such a it's easy to sell cynicism in science fiction and be like, here's a future where everything is dark and everything sucks and we all just have to eat each other's thumbs to survive or whatever.
yeah.
And I think it's much better to be like, here's an idea of like there's something in Moonray that's like, even if humanity doesn't make it, like something will make it, and the kind of core of what are people about will continue.
And it's not foolishly utopian either. You're not just giving a hopeful story with no nuance about the complications.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's been very interesting to see it develop and see your pages for book 2 come together, and it's been really inspiring to be a part of something that has a big scale like that. And we talk about scale a lot in terms of your physical artwork. I think it's obviously incredibly at work in the writing as well, and I love it that you're always thinking big.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate it. It's been a cool part. It's been hard for me to sell hard Moonray book 1 because I feel like book 2 I managed to do things that I didn't have the foothold for in book 1. So I'm really excited for people to see that one as well.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's not going to be that long. I mean, we're looking at book 2 potentially April 2024.
Wow.
So in the meanwhile, we hope that people will go to your local comic store, go to your local bookstore, go to Kickstarter for the next 6 days or something like that, and pre-order a copy of this book so you have it the first day that it's out. Which if you order it on Kickstarter, you'll get it a week or two early, and the comic stores a week or two after that, and bookstores a week or two after that. So
Certainly.
And pre-orders is like what determines how much else gets ordered, so that they can be copies hanging out on the shelves for people to stumble across, which is such an important thing too. So
yeah, and Moonray is really interesting in that they're doing so much with it, where if there is like a video game and a possible animated show, then like the comic will be this weird version of it that is where a lot of the core ideas are coming from, but it is almost like the least risky version of it, so we can really play around and do crazy stuff with, because comics are such a niche medium these days, which I kind of like. I think it's cool that it's like doing zines.
Yeah. Well, as you said in the end of the King City outro, right? You can make the best comic ever with stolen pens while you're sitting in a dumpster.
Yeah. I mean, the dumpster probably would make it harder, but I think about that a lot whenever I'm like, like right now I'm in like this room I've just set up to be just my studio, and I'm just like, it is nice to have a desk.
less damage on the back and neck, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for watching, guys. I don't know if we're going to split this up into 2 videos, or this is going to be just one, or what. I don't know how you guys are going to watch it, but I really appreciate you all following along. And Brandon, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today and discuss work that is more than 10 years old. That must be a weird, hopefully not bad experience.
Yeah, no, I flipping through it was the first time I flipped through Warheads and in a while, and I was like, oh, I still like this, so that's good. I don't have that kind of thing that a lot of artists do, where they hate their work. I always think like, this is the best I could do at the time, which is something I tell myself constantly. And then I look back at old stuff and I'm like, oh, I didn't do too bad back then. That's okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Thank goodness. That it seems so neurotic to have to go back and fix everything. I can't imagine living that way. So that's good to hear.
There's some people that like it, that's what they want. But yeah, I think you got to be the shark. You got to always swim forward.
Yeah, you got to keep moving or die.
Right. Or get flipped upside down or punched in the nose by somebody making a YouTube video. All right. Good to talk to you guys. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Take it easy.
Yeah, good talking to you guys.
Bye.